The fluorescent lights flickered inside Riverside Memorial Hospital in Portland, Oregon, as the emergency doors exploded open. A military convoy screeched to a halt outside. 3 black SUVs and an armored medical transport. Soldiers in combat fatigues rushed a stretcher through the automatic doors, their boots tracking mud and something darker across the pristine white floor. On that stretcher lay a man whose face had been on every news channel for the past 18 months. General Marcus Hale, the Pentagon's most decorated battlefield commander, bleeding out from what the initial reports would only describe as a training accident. Doctors swarmed. Nurses shouted orders. The entire ER descended into controlled chaos. And standing frozen near the staff lockers, clutching a manila envelope with her final paycheck inside, was Sarah Brennan, a 34-year-old nurse with tired green eyes and a surgical scar running along her left forearm that nobody had ever bothered to ask about. She'd been fired 3 hours ago. Her badge was already deactivated. Security was supposed to escort her out at shift change. Then the general's eyes opened. His hand shot out, gripping the wrist of the lead trauma surgeon with desperate strength. "Where's Brennan?" he rasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Get me Sarah Brennan." Every head in the ER turned. The hospital's chief of surgery, Dr. Victor Lang, stared at Sarah like she'd just materialized out of thin air. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You don't even know him." But the general's vital signs were crashing, and his fingers wouldn't release the surgeon's wrist. "Only her," Hale choked out. "Nobody else touches me." Before we dive into what happens next, I need you to do something for me. Stay with this story until the very end, because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and let me see just how far this story can travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. 3 weeks earlier, Sarah had walked through those same emergency doors wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was her first day at Riverside Memorial after what the hospital's HR department delicately called a transitional period following her military discharge. The truth was messier than that. Sarah had spent 11 years as a combat medic attached to special operations units in places the government still wouldn't acknowledge on any official map. She'd stitched soldiers back together in blown-out buildings while gunfire tore through walls. She'd performed amputations by headlamp in the back of moving vehicles. She'd held dying 19-year-olds and lied to them about seeing their families again. And then one day, after a mission that went sideways in ways she still couldn't talk about, the Army handed her an honorable discharge, a handful of medals she'd never wear, and a recommendation letter for civilian nursing positions. Riverside Memorial had been her third application. The first 2 hospitals took one look at her combat service record and found polite reasons to pass. "We're thrilled to have you," the HR coordinator had said during her orientation, though her eyes kept drifting to Sarah's personnel file like she was reading about a stranger. "Your experience will be such an asset to our team." That optimism lasted approximately 4 days. The problem started small. A senior nurse named Patricia Voss assigned Sarah to the medication inventory, grunt work usually reserved for first-year nursing students. When Sarah finished early and offered to help with patient rounds, Patricia's expression hardened. "We do things a certain way here," Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular edge of someone who'd been waiting years for the chance to put someone in their place. "This isn't some field hospital where you can just improvise. Follow the protocols or don't bother showing up." Sarah had nodded and kept her mouth shut. She'd learned a long time ago that explaining yourself to people who'd already made up their minds was a waste of breath. But it got worse. Dr. Victor Lang ran the trauma department like a fiefdom, and he'd made his opinion of Sarah clear during their first interaction. She'd been assisting with a motorcycle accident victim, compound fracture, significant blood loss, textbook stabilization case. Sarah had noticed the patient's respiratory rate climbing and his oxygen saturation dropping before the monitors caught it. "Doctor," she'd said quietly, "we should check for a pneumothorax. His breathing pattern suggests..." "Suggests what?" Lang cut her off, not even looking up from the chart he was reviewing. "Are you trying to do my job now, Nurse Brennan?" "No, sir. I just think..." "You think?" He'd finally looked at her then, his expression somewhere between amusement and contempt. "You're a nurse. Your job is to follow orders, not diagnose patients. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. 2 minutes later, the patient went into respiratory distress. The chest X-ray confirmed a collapsed lung. Lang had performed the emergency needle decompression without acknowledging Sarah's warning, and when the patient stabilized, he turned to the assembled residents with a self-satisfied smile. "That's why we always stay vigilant," he'd announced. "Traumatic pneumothorax can develop rapidly. Good catch, everyone." Sarah had felt the eyes of the other nurses on her. Some sympathetic, most carefully neutral. Nobody said anything. Nobody ever did. The pattern repeated itself over the following weeks. Sarah would spot something, a medication interaction, a developing infection, a subtle change in vital signs, and either get ignored or worse, publicly corrected for overstepping her role. Meanwhile, the nursing staff had started treating her like she carried some kind of contagion. "Did you really do all that combat stuff?" a younger nurse named Jessica had asked one day in the break room, her voice pitched low like they were discussing something vaguely shameful. "Like actually treating wounded soldiers?" "I did," Sarah had replied simply. Jessica had wrinkled her nose. "That's so intense. I could never. All that blood and trauma? I'd have nightmares forever." She'd said it like Sarah should feel sorry for herself, like those years had damaged her somehow. Sarah had just smiled and changed the subject. What she didn't say was that she already had nightmares. What she didn't mention was that the clean, quiet halls of Riverside Memorial sometimes felt more alien to her than the war zones had. At least in combat, people said what they meant. At least there, competence mattered more than politics. The real trouble started on a Tuesday night shift in early October. Sarah had been assigned to the ICU, another rotation that Patricia seemed to save specifically for her, given that it meant working alone with minimal supervision during the overnight hours. She didn't mind the solitude, but she minded what it represented, the staff's ongoing effort to make her irrelevant. Around 2 a.m, she'd been checking on a post-surgical patient named Mr. Garrett, a 67-year-old man recovering from a complicated gallbladder removal. His vitals looked stable on the monitors, but something bothered Sarah. His skin had a grayish tint under the fluorescent lights. His breathing sounded off. Not labored exactly, but not right either. She'd pulled his chart and reviewed the medication orders. That's when she saw it. The anticoagulant dosage was wrong. Not dangerously wrong at first glance, the kind of error that might slip past a tired resident or an overworked pharmacist, but wrong enough that combined with the patient's age and kidney function, it could cause internal bleeding. Sarah had immediately paged the attending physician on call. 20 minutes later, Dr. Lang had appeared looking irritated and sleep-deprived. "This better be good, Brennan. I was actually getting some rest." "I think there's a dosage error on Mr. Garrett's anticoagulant," she'd said, handing him the chart. "His renal function numbers suggest we should reduce the dose by at least 30%. Otherwise, we risk—" "You think?" Lang had snatched the chart from her hands. "You think there's an error? Do you have any idea how many medication orders I review in a single day? The dosage is fine. It's within normal parameters." "For a healthy adult, yes, but Mr. Garrett's kidneys aren't processing." "I know how kidneys work." His voice had dropped to something cold and flat. "What I don't know is why you keep trying to practice medicine without a license. You're a nurse. You follow orders. You don't question doctors who actually went to medical school." Sarah had held his gaze for a long moment. In that silence, she'd weighed her options. Push back and make an enemy, or let it go and potentially watch a patient suffer. She'd chosen the losing battle. "With respect, Dr. Lang, I've seen this exact scenario result in retroperitoneal hemorrhage. If we don't adjust the dose—" "Get out." She'd blinked. "Excuse me? You're dismissed from this unit. I'll have Patricia reassign you. And Brennan?" His smile had been razor thin. "I'm documenting this conversation. Insubordination and questioning medical judgment aren't qualities we value here." Sarah had left without another word. She'd made her case. She'd done what she could. 36 hours later, Mr. Garrett had coded. Internal bleeding, exactly as she'd predicted. He'd survived, but barely, and only after an emergency surgery that left him in far worse condition than he'd been in before. The hospital's quality review board had opened an investigation within hours, and somehow Sarah's name had ended up at the center of it. She'd been called into a conference room on a Thursday afternoon. Patricia Voss had been there. Dr. Lang. 2 hospital administrators she'd never met, and a printed stack of incident reports that painted a very specific picture. Sarah Brennan, overeager combat nurse who didn't understand civilian medicine, had questioned multiple medication orders over the past 3 weeks. She'd caused confusion among staff. She'd undermined physician authority. And in the case of Mr. Garrett, she'd been the last nurse to handle his medication chart before the error occurred. "Wait," Sarah had said slowly, ice forming in her stomach. "You think I made the dosage error?" "We're not accusing you of anything," one of the administrators had said, in that careful tone people use when they're absolutely accusing you of something. "We're simply trying to understand the timeline. I reported the error to Dr. Lang. I tried to get it corrected." Lang had leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "You mentioned some concerns, yes, but you didn't file a formal incident report. You didn't follow proper protocol. And when I reviewed the chart, everything appeared correct. Because you didn't listen. I think we're done here," Patricia had interrupted. "Sarah, you're being placed on administrative leave pending the completion of this investigation. 2 weeks paid. We'll contact you with next steps." Sarah had walked out of that conference room knowing exactly how this would end. She'd seen enough bureaucratic knife fights in the military to recognize when the fix was in. But the real betrayal had come 3 days later. She'd returned to this hospital to clean out her locker. Administrative leave wasn't supposed to include losing access to personal belongings, but her badge wouldn't work on the employee entrance, so she'd had to wait for someone to let her in. When she'd finally reached the locker room, she'd found Jessica standing near her open locker with a strange expression on her face. "Sarah," Jessica had said quietly, "don't open that." But Sarah had already seen it. 3 vials of fentanyl tucked behind her spare scrubs. Hospital-grade narcotics that she'd never touched, never requisitioned, never had any reason to access. Someone had planted them there. The realization had hit her like cold water. This wasn't just about Mr. Garrett. This wasn't about medication errors or protocol violations. Someone wanted her gone badly enough to commit a crime. Jessica had grabbed her arm. "Security's coming. They got an anonymous tip about drug theft. Sarah, you need to leave right now." "I didn't take those." "I know. I believe you, but it doesn't matter what I believe." Jessica's eyes had been genuinely afraid. "They're going to arrest you. You need to go." Sarah had stared at those vials for 3 long seconds, her mind racing through scenarios. She could stay and fight, demand a proper investigation, get a lawyer, make them prove it, or she could recognize a setup when she saw one and save herself the public humiliation of a perp, walk through the hospital where she'd tried to build a new life. She'd chosen the door. By the time hospital security and Portland PD had arrived at the locker room, Sarah had been 2 blocks away, her hands shaking on the steering wheel of her decade-old Honda Civic. The termination letter had arrived by email that same evening. The hospital's official statement thanked her for her service and wished her well in future endeavors. It made no mention of the drug theft investigation, which meant they were keeping that option in their back pocket, leverage in case she tried to fight the firing or go public. Sarah had read the email 3 times, then closed her laptop and sat in the dark kitchen of her tiny apartment, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. She'd survived firefights. She'd survived watching friends die in her arms. She'd survived bureaucracy and bad commanders and missions that should have killed her. But apparently, she couldn't survive being a nurse in a civilian hospital. The notification on her phone had buzzed around 10 p.m. A news alert. Decorated General Marcus Hale critical after-training incident. Sarah had barely glanced at it. The name meant nothing to her. She'd treated dozens of generals and colonels over the years, most of them just faces attached to ranks, none of them particularly memorable. She'd gone to bed that night thinking her story was over, thinking she'd have to find some other way to make herself useful in a world that didn't seem to want what she had to offer. She'd been wrong. The phone call had come at 6 a.m., jarring her awake from a dream she couldn't quite remember. "Is this Sarah Brennan?" The voice had been clipped, professional, military. "Who's asking?" "This is Captain Rodriguez with the Department of Defense Medical Liaison Office. We need you at Riverside Memorial Hospital in Portland immediately. I'm texting you a security clearance code right now. Show it at the emergency entrance. Someone will escort you inside." Sarah had sat up, her heart suddenly pounding. "I don't work at Riverside anymore." "We know. That's not relevant. General Hale is being transported to your location, and he's specifically requested your presence during treatment. This is not optional, Ms. Brennan. A car is already en route to your address." The call had ended before she could ask any of the 1,000 questions suddenly crowding her mind. General Marcus Hale. The name still didn't trigger any recognition. She'd thrown on clothes and waited by the window. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, a black SUV had pulled up outside her apartment building. A young soldier in fatigues had emerged and stood by the passenger door waiting. Sarah had grabbed her old military ID, technically expired but still the only proof she had of who she'd been, and headed downstairs. The ride to the hospital had taken 12 minutes. Nobody spoke. The soldier driving had kept his eyes on the road with the kind of focus that suggested he'd been given very specific orders. The soldier in the passenger seat had kept one hand near his sidearm, though Sarah couldn't imagine what threat they were expecting. When they'd pulled up to Riverside Memorial, the emergency bay had been completely locked down. Police cruisers blocked the entrance. Security guards Sarah didn't recognize patrolled the perimeter. And standing just inside the automatic doors, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past week, was Patricia Voss. Sarah had climbed out of the SUV and walked toward the entrance, her expired military ID held up like a shield. Patricia's eyes had gone wide. "What are you doing here? You can't be here." "Apparently I can." Sarah had handed her phone to the nearest security guard, showing the DOD clearance code. "I was told to report immediately." The guard had scanned the code, nodded, and stepped aside. Patricia had grabbed Sarah's arm. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you were fired for cause. You're not authorized to—" "Let her through." Dr. Lang had appeared from somewhere inside the ER, his face pale and drawn. Behind him, Sarah could see the organized chaos of a major trauma response. Doctors running, nurses shouting, equipment being wheeled into position. "Victor," Patricia had hissed, "she's been terminated. She's under investigation for—" "I don't care." Lang's voice had been flat, empty. "The patient specifically asked for her. We don't have time to argue." He turned and walked back into the ER without waiting for a response. Sarah had followed, her pulse hammering in her throat. The scene inside had been controlled pandemonium. Every available trauma bay was occupied or being prepped. Military personnel in uniform mixed with hospital staff, creating a strange hybrid environment that felt both familiar and alien to Sarah. And then she'd seen him. General Marcus Hale was being transferred from a military stretcher to a hospital gurney, his uniform cut away to expose multiple injuries. Blood soaked through temporary bandages. His skin had that grayish pallor Sarah had seen too many times before, the color of a body struggling to keep its vital organs alive. But his eyes were open, and the moment they found her, something in his expression shifted. "Brennan," he'd rasped, his voice barely audible over the noise. "About damn time." The lead trauma surgeon, a woman Sarah didn't recognize, probably brought in from another hospital, had been barking orders at the assembled team. She'd glanced at Sarah with brief confusion, then dismissed her as irrelevant. "We need to get him to OR2 immediately. BP is dropping, and we've got internal bleeding that we can't isolate. Prep for emergency exploratory?" "No!" Hale's hand had shot out, gripping the gurney rail with desperate strength. "Brennan does it. Nobody else." The trauma surgeon had frozen. "Sir, I understand you're disoriented, but this nurse isn't qualified to—" "I'm not asking." Blood flecked Hale's lips as he spoke. "Either she treats me or nobody does. That's an order." The room had gone silent. Sarah had felt every eye turned to her. Patricia's expression was pure shock. Lang looked like he'd been slapped. The military personnel seemed unsurprised, which somehow made everything more unsettling. The trauma surgeon had looked desperately at Lang. "Doctor, tell him this is insane. She's a nurse. She can't perform surgery." But Lang hadn't said anything. He'd just stared at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read, confusion mixed with something that might have been fear. "Someone want to explain," Sarah had said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Why a general I've never met is asking for me specifically." Hale had let out a wet laugh that turned into a cough. "Never met? Jesus, Brennan, you really did scrub your record clean, didn't you?" "General, I don't—" "Kandahar province," he'd interrupted, his eyes locked on hers. 7 years ago. Convoy ambush on Highway 1. You remember that?" Sarah's breath had caught. She remembered. 3 vehicles destroyed, Hale had continued, his voice getting weaker. 14 casualties. Enemy fire from 3 directions. No air support available for 40 minutes. and one Army medic who pulled 7 men out of burning wreckage and kept them alive long enough for evac. The ER had gone absolutely silent. "You operated on me in the back of a disabled MRAP while bullets were punching through the hull," Hale said. "You put chest tubes in 2 soldiers without anesthetic because we were out of morphine. You talked a 19-year-old kid through losing his leg and somehow convinced him he was going to be okay." Sarah's hands had started shaking. She'd forced them still. "That was a long time ago, sir." "Not that long." Hale's eyes had started to flutter. "I looked for you afterward, tried to get you a commendation. The higher-ups buried it, said the mission was classified, couldn't draw attention, but I never forgot." His vital signs had started dropping on the monitors. The trauma surgeon had moved to intervene, but Hale's hand had shot out again. "Brennan," he'd whispered, "I trust you. Only you. Don't let these people kill me." Then his eyes had rolled back and the monitors had started screaming. Sarah had moved without thinking, her body responding on instincts carved deep by years of trauma medicine. She'd pushed past the trauma surgeon, her hands already reaching for the gurney. "Someone get me a crash cart and a central line kit, now!" "You can't," Patricia had started. "Get out of my way or watch him die." Sarah's voice had been ice cold, the same tone she'd used when ordering soldiers to hold position under fire. "Those are your options." The military personnel had moved first, clearing space around the gurney. The hospital staff had hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before following. Dr. Lang had stepped forward. "Brennan, if you do this and something goes wrong, then you can add it to the list of reasons you already fired me." She'd looked at him directly. "But right now, I'm the only person in this room he trusts, and trust matters more than credentials when someone's bleeding out." She'd turned back to Hale without waiting for a response. The next 20 minutes had blurred together in a way that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Sarah's hands had moved through procedures she'd performed hundreds of times in conditions far worse than this. Central line placement, rapid trauma assessment, pressure point management, every action precise, practiced, automatic. She'd identified the source of bleeding, a lacerated spleen and damaged liver, from what looked like blunt force trauma, within 90 seconds of getting her hands on him. "He needs surgery," she'd announced, "but he's too unstable to move to an OR. We do it here, or he doesn't make it." The trauma surgeon had stared at her. "You can't perform a splenectomy in an ER bay." "I've done it in worse places." Sarah had looked around at the assembled staff. "I need a surgical kit, 2 units of O-negative blood, and everyone who isn't essential out of this room right now." Nobody had moved. "That's not a request," Sarah had said quietly. "Get me what I need, or get out." This time, they'd listened. Dr. Lang had approached her one more time as the room cleared. "Brennan, if you're wrong about this, I'm not." She'd met his eyes. "And you know it. You've known from day one that I was better at this than you wanted to admit. That's why you tried so hard to get rid of me." His face had gone pale. "Now either help me save his life," Sarah had continued, "or leave and let me work." Lang had left. The surgery had taken 2 hours. Sarah had worked with absolute focus, her hands steady despite the knowledge that one mistake would end not just Hale's life, but any chance she had of clearing her name. The military surgical assistant who'd been assigned to the convoy had worked across from her, competent but clearly deferring to Sarah's expertise. They'd removed the damaged spleen, repaired the liver laceration, stabilized the internal bleeding. Piece by piece, Sarah had pulled General Marcus Hale back from the edge of death. When his vitals finally stabilized, when the monitors showed something approaching normal readings, Sarah had stepped back and let herself breathe for the first time in hours. The military assistant had looked at her with something like awe. "That was incredible, ma'am. I've never seen anyone work that fast." Sarah had just nodded, suddenly exhausted. They'd moved Hale to a secure recovery room, accompanied by armed military guards and more monitoring equipment than Sarah had seen outside a major medical center. She'd stayed with him, checking his vitals every 15 minutes, watching for any sign of decline. Around hour 3 of post-op monitoring, Patricia had appeared in the doorway, looking like she'd been crying. "The police are here," she'd said quietly. "They want to talk to you about the missing medications." Sarah had looked up from Hale's chart. "Tell them I'll be available after my patient is stable." "Sarah?" I just saved a general's life in your emergency room using skills you people spent weeks telling me I didn't have. Either the police can wait, or they can arrest me right here in front of him and the armed soldiers outside this door. Their choice. Patricia had left without another word. 2 hours later, General Hale had opened his eyes. His gaze had found Sarah immediately, and he'd managed something that might have been a smile. "Still alive," he'd croaked. "Still alive," Sarah had confirmed. "Don't make me regret that." He'd laughed weakly, then winced. "Don't make me laugh. Everything hurts." That's the being alive part. Hale had studied her for a long moment. "They tried to destroy you here, didn't they? That's why you looked so surprised when I asked for you." Sarah had hesitated, then nodded. "They did a pretty good job of it." "Not anymore, they didn't." His eyes had hardened despite the pain medication. "Captain Rodriguez is in the waiting room right now with a very interested JAG officer. I'd suggest the people who set you up start getting their stories straight, because I take it personally when someone tries to sabotage one of the best combat medics I've ever seen." Sarah's throat had tightened. "Sir, you don't have to—" "Yay! I don't have to do anything except not die, and you handled that part. The rest is just making sure the right people understand exactly who you are and what you're capable of." He'd closed his eyes. "Now let me sleep before I say something sentimental and ruin my reputation." Sarah had stepped out into the hallway to find it crowded with people. Military personnel, hospital administrators, 2 police officers, and standing off to one side, looking smaller than Sarah had ever seen her, Patricia Voss. The JAG officer, a severe-looking woman with captain's bars, had approached Sarah directly. "Ms. Brennan, I'm Captain Andrea Willis. I need to ask you some questions about your employment history with this facility and the circumstances surrounding General Hale's treatment here today." Sarah had nodded. "Of course. But first," Willis had continued, her voice carrying across the hallway, "I need to inform the Portland Police Department that they should consider any investigation into medication theft at this facility completely separate from Ms. Brennan. The General has made it clear that any attempt to interfere with her work here will be treated as obstruction of a military medical operation." One of the police officers had frowned. "Ma'am, we have evidence that—" "I'm sure you do, and I'm sure it will be investigated thoroughly, but not today, and not in a way that prevents Miss Brennan from doing her job." Willis had smiled thinly. "Are we clear?" The officers had exchanged glances, then nodded and left. Willis had turned back to Sarah. "Now then, let's have that conversation." They'd moved to a private conference room. For the next hour, Sarah had explained everything: the medication dosage error, Mr. Garrett's hemorrhage, the planted narcotics, the systematic campaign to undermine her credibility. Willis had taken notes without expression. When Sarah finished, the JAG officer had simply nodded. "We'll need access to your personnel file, medication logs, and security footage from the past month. I assume the hospital will cooperate fully?" One of the administrators who'd somehow materialized in the room had nodded quickly. "Absolutely. Whatever you need." "Good." Willis had stood. "Ms. Brennan, you're free to return to monitoring General Hale. We'll be in touch." Sarah had walked back to Hale's recovery room in a daze. The hallway had cleared except for the military guards, who'd nodded to her as she passed. Inside, Hale had been awake again, watching the door. "They're going to investigate," Sarah had said. "They're going to do more than investigate." His voice had been stronger now. "They're going to tear this place apart until they find out exactly what happened to you. And then the people responsible are going to learn a very important lesson about consequences." Sarah had sunk into the chair beside his bed. "I just wanted to be a nurse. That's all I wanted after everything else." "You are a nurse," Hale had replied. "You're also a hell of a surgeon, apparently, though I'm guessing that's not technically supposed to be in your job description." "It's not." "Well," he'd closed his eyes again. "Maybe it should be." Outside the window, dawn had been breaking over Portland. Sarah had sat there watching the sunrise, her mind full of questions about what came next, her hand still steady despite everything. In the hallway beyond, she could hear voices rising, administrators arguing, phones ringing, the hospital waking up to the reality that something fundamental had shifted overnight. The woman they'd tried to erase had just saved the most important patient to enter their doors in a decade, and now everyone wanted to know who Sarah Brennan really was. The answer came faster than Sarah expected. By noon, Captain Willis had returned with a forensic accountant 2 military investigators, and a warrant that gave them access to every electronic system in Riverside Memorial. The hospital's legal team tried to slow things down with procedural objections, but Willis had simply handed them a document stamped with enough federal authority to make the hospital's attorney go pale. "You have 2 choices," Willis had said calmly. "Full cooperation starting now, or we bring in Homeland Security and shut down your emergency services while we investigate potential threats to a senior military official. Your call." The hospital had cooperated. Sarah spent most of that first day in Hale's recovery room, checking his vitals and trying to ignore the chaos building outside. She could hear raised voices down the hallway, administrators scrambling, staff whispering, the distinct sound of an institution realizing it had stepped on a landmine. Around 3 p.m., Jessica appeared in the doorway, looking nervous. "Can I talk to you?" Sarah glanced at Hale, who was sleeping soundly, thanks to the pain medication, then stepped into the hallway. "I need to tell someone what I saw," Jessica said quietly, "before they ask me officially. I saw Dr. Lang go into the medication storage room the night before they found those vials in your locker. He was in there for maybe 20 minutes. That's unusual. Attending physicians almost never handle narcotic inventory themselves." Sarah's stomach tightened. "Did you tell anyone?" "I mentioned it to Patricia. She told me I must have been mistaken." Jessica's hands twisted together. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I should have done more than just warn you to run." "You did what you could. Most people wouldn't have done that much. It wasn't enough." Jessica's eyes were wet. "They destroyed you, and I just watched it happen." Sarah wanted to tell her it was fine, that she understood, that working in a hostile environment meant making impossible choices. But the truth was she didn't feel generous enough for that conversation yet. The anger was still too fresh. "The investigators are going to want to talk to you," Sarah said instead. "Tell them exactly what you saw. That's how you help now." Jessica nodded and left quickly, like she couldn't bear to stay in Sarah's presence any longer. The first real break came at 7 p.m. Captain Willis found Sarah in the cafeteria, forcing down a sandwich she couldn't taste. The JAG officer slid into the seat across from her with a tablet and an expression that suggested she'd just found something interesting. "We pulled the security footage from the medication storage room," Willis said without preamble. "Dr. Victor Lang accessed the narcotics cabinet on October 14th at 11:43 p.m. He removed 3 vials of fentanyl and signed them out under a patient name that doesn't exist in your system. 40 minutes later, those same vials appeared in your locker." Sarah set down her sandwich. "How do you know they're the same vials?" "Serial numbers. Every narcotic in this hospital has a tracking code. Lang was sloppy. He didn't realize the vials are photographed during inventory checks." Willis turned the tablet around, showing Sarah a freeze frame of Lang's face clearly visible on camera, his hand reaching into the medication cabinet. "We also found altered medication logs on Mr. Garrett's file. The original dosage you flagged was correct. Someone changed it after you reported the error, then changed it back after the patient hemorrhaged. Made it look like you'd been wrong from the start." Lang, Willis confirmed, along with at least 2 other physicians who helped cover it up. "We're still piecing together the full scope, but it looks like there was a coordinated effort to discredit you." Sarah's hands had started shaking again. She forced them still. "Why? What did I do to make them hate me that much?" Willis studied her for a moment. "You made them look incompetent. Not intentionally, I'm sure. But every time you caught something they missed, every time you demonstrated skills they didn't have, it reminded everyone in this hospital that credentials and experience aren't the same thing. People like Dr. Lang built their careers on hierarchy. You threatened that. So they tried to destroy mine. They tried." Willis's smile was cold. "They failed, spectacularly." The JAG officer stood to leave, then paused. "General Hale asked me to tell you something. He said you once told him that the difference between a good medic and a great one isn't technical skill. It's giving a damn when it would be easier not to. He wants you to know he hasn't forgotten that." Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't remember saying that, but it sounded like something her younger, more idealistic self might have believed. "One more thing," Willis added. "The hospital's board of directors has requested a meeting with you tomorrow morning. I'd recommend having legal representation present." "I don't have a lawyer." "You do now. JAG is providing one, courtesy of General Hale. 9 a.m. in the main conference room. Don't be late." She left Sarah sitting alone in the cafeteria, surrounded by the dinner rush of hospital staff who suddenly couldn't meet her eyes. That night, Sarah slept in the chair beside Hale's bed. Not because she needed to, the nursing staff was perfectly capable of monitoring him, but because the idea of going back to her empty apartment felt impossible. Here, at least, she had a purpose. Around 2 a.m., Hale woke up and found her dozing with her head against the side of his bed. "Brennan." She jerked awake, immediately checking his monitors. "What's wrong? Pain levels, okay?" "I'm fine. You look terrible." "Thanks." He shifted slightly, wincing. "You don't have to stay here. I've got half the army watching my back." "I know. So why are you still here?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Because 7 years ago in Kandahar, you trusted me when you had no reason to. A medic you'd never met, in the middle of a firefight, with no supervision and no backup. You let me cut into your chest with a field knife because the alternative was dying, and you looked at me and said, 'Do what you need to do.' Nobody's trusted me like that since." Hale's expression softened. That wasn't trust. That was desperation. Same thing sometimes. Maybe. He closed his eyes. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry you ended up in a place that tried to break you. You deserved better. We both know the world doesn't run on what people deserve." "No," Hale agreed. "But sometimes it runs on what people can force it to give them. Get some sleep, Brennan. Tomorrow's going to be ugly." He wasn't wrong. The meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp in Riverside Memorial's largest conference room. Sarah arrived with the JAG-provided attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus Vega, who'd spent the previous evening preparing her for what he called corporate warfare, disguised as dialogue. The hospital's side of the table was crowded. The board of directors, 7 people in expensive suits who Sarah had never seen before. The hospital's legal counsel, 2 representatives from the hospital's insurance company, and sitting at the far end looking like he'd aged a decade overnight, Dr. Victor Lang. Patricia Voss was noticeably absent. The board chairman, a silver-haired man named Douglas Kern, opened with what was clearly meant to be a conciliatory tone. "Miss Brennan, we want to start by apologizing for the unfortunate misunderstanding that led to your termination. We've reviewed the evidence provided by military investigators, and it's clear that you were the victim of a terrible injustice perpetrated by certain members of our staff." Sarah said nothing. Vega had coached her. Let them talk first. Let them commit to a position, then negotiate from there. Kern continued, "We'd like to offer you immediate reinstatement with full back pay for the period of your suspension. We're also prepared to issue a public statement clearing your name and acknowledging the hospital's error in this matter." "That's very generous," Vega said dryly. "What else?" The hospital's attorney, a nervous woman named Rebecca Torres, jumped in. "We're also offering a settlement package to compensate Ms. Brennan for emotional distress and damage to her professional reputation. The amount is negotiable, but we're starting at $75,000. Plus a non-disclosure agreement, I assume," Vega said. Torres hesitated. "That's standard in these situations. Standard when you're trying to bury something." Vega leaned forward. "Let me be clear about what's actually happening here. Your hospital didn't just fire my client unjustly. You allowed, and in some cases actively participated in, a criminal conspiracy to frame her for drug theft, to cover up medical errors that nearly killed a patient, and to systematically destroy her career because she made your physicians look bad. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is criminal negligence at best and conspiracy at worst." The room went very quiet. Kern's conciliatory expression hardened. "Mr. Vega, I understand you're upset, but throwing around accusations isn't productive. We're trying to make this right. Are you?" Vega pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Because according to the documents provided by military investigators, this isn't the first time Riverside Memorial has had problems with senior staff targeting personnel with military backgrounds. In the past 3 years, you've had 4 nurses and 2 physicians with combat medical experience resign under questionable circumstances. 3 of them filed complaints about workplace harassment that were dismissed by your HR department. Sarah hadn't known that. She watched the board members exchange uncomfortable glances. "Those cases were thoroughly investigated," Torres said quickly. "By the same HR department that reported to the same administrators who are sitting at this table right now," Vega countered. Forgive me if I don't find that reassuring. Kern's jaw tightened. What exactly are you asking for, Mr. Vega? Full reinstatement with a formal promotion to trauma specialist and a salary commensurate with her actual skill level. A public apology from the hospital and from Dr. Lang personally. Mandatory retraining for all senior staff on workplace harassment and professional conduct. An independent review of your HR practices. And no NDA. My client gets to tell her story however and whenever she wants. That's ridiculous, Torres sputtered. We can't agree to... You can and you will, Vega interrupted. Because the alternative is that we file a federal lawsuit alleging a pattern of discrimination against military veterans. We contact every news organization in Oregon, and we make sure that when people think of Riverside Memorial, they think of the hospital that tried to destroy a decorated combat medic because she made your doctors look incompetent. The room erupted. Board members talked over each other. Torres frantically whispered to Kern. Lang sat frozen at the end of the table, his face ashen. Sarah watched it all with a strange detachment. 2 weeks ago, these people had controlled her entire future. Now they were scrambling to manage the damage she represented. We need time to discuss this internally, Kern finally said. You have until 5 p.m. today, Vega replied. After that, we file. They left the conference room together. In the hallway outside, Vega turned to Sarah with a satisfied smile. That went well. Did it? Sarah felt numb. They're never going to actually agree to all that. They will. They're just not ready to admit it yet. Trust me, I've been doing this for 15 years. They know they're screwed. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the skepticism ran too deep. She'd learned the hard way that powerful institutions didn't accountability easily. She spent the rest of the morning with Hale, who was improving rapidly despite the severity of his injuries. The military doctors who'd flown in to consult were impressed by Sarah's surgical work, though they kept their comments professional and avoided asking too many questions about how a nurse had performed a procedure that technically required years of surgical training. Around 1 p.m., Jessica found her again. Patricia's gone, she said quietly. She resigned this morning, just walked into HR, handed over her badge, and left. Didn't even clean out her desk. Sarah absorbed that information. Anyone else? Dr. Reeves from cardiology. He was one of the ones who signed off on your termination paperwork. And there's a rumor that Dr. Lang is being placed on administrative leave pending a criminal investigation. That's not a rumor, Sarah said. I saw the police taking him out in handcuffs about an hour ago. Jessica's eyes went wide. Oh my God. They stood there in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Then Jessica spoke again, her voice small. What happens now? To the rest of us, I mean. The people who just watched and didn't do anything. Sarah looked at her, this young nurse who'd tried to help in her own limited way, who was scared and guilty and looking for some kind of absolution Sarah didn't know how to give. You keep doing your job, Sarah said finally. You try to be better than you were. That's all any of us can do. Jessica nodded and left quickly, like she'd been hoping for something more, but hadn't really expected it. At 4:30 p.m., Vega called. They're agreeing to everything, he said, sounding almost surprised despite his earlier confidence. Full reinstatement, promotion, public apology, independent review, no NDA. They're drafting the paperwork now. Sarah sat down heavily on the edge of Hale's bed. Just like that? Just like that. Apparently, Captain Willis had a conversation with their insurance carrier this afternoon. Once the insurance company realized how much exposure they were facing, they told the hospital to settle immediately on whatever terms we wanted. When do I start? That's up to you. The offer includes the option to take a month of paid leave before returning if you want time to process everything. Sarah thought about it. A month ago, she would have jumped at the chance for time off. Now the idea of sitting alone in her apartment with nothing to do felt worse than jumping back into the chaos. I'll start Monday, she said. You sure? You don't have to rush this. I'm sure. After she hung up, Hale looked at her from his hospital bed. You're going back? I am. Even after everything they did to you? Sarah was quiet for a moment. A patient nearly died because nobody listened to me. That's not going to happen again, not on my watch. Hale smiled. There's the Brennan I remember. But returning to work turned out to be more complicated than Sarah anticipated. The hospital issued its public statement Friday afternoon, a carefully worded press release that acknowledged serious failures in our internal processes and announced Sarah's reinstatement along with comprehensive reforms to ensure this never happens again. The statement was buried in corporate language, but the local news picked it up anyway. By Saturday morning, Sarah's phone was ringing with interview requests from reporters who'd connected the dots between the hospital scandal and General Hale's mysterious medical emergency. She ignored all of them. What she couldn't ignore was the reaction from hospital staff. Walking through the hallways to check on Hale became an exercise in reading people's expressions. Some guilty, some resentful, some carefully neutral. Nobody knew quite how to treat her now. She wasn't the disposable nurse they could mock anymore, but she also wasn't just a colleague returning from leave. She was the person who'd exposed how broken the system was. Sunday night, Sarah lay awake in her apartment trying to mentally prepare for Monday morning. She'd spent years in combat zones, had treated casualties under fire, had made life-or-death decisions with incomplete information and no backup. But the idea of walking back into Riverside Memorial made her stomach twist with anxiety. At 2 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't come in Monday. You've made your point. Take the settlement and walk away before this gets worse." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She arrived at the hospital at 6:30 Monday morning, 40 minutes before her official start time. The emergency entrance was quiet in the pre-dawn darkness. She badged in with her reactivated ID, the security guard gave her a nervous nod, and headed for the locker room. Someone had cleaned out her old locker and left it empty. Sarah hung up her jacket, changed into fresh scrubs, and stood there for a moment looking at her reflection in the small mirror attached to the door. She looked tired. Older than 34, the scar on her forearm caught the fluorescent light. "You can do this," she told her reflection quietly. The reflection didn't look convinced. She found the ER already busy despite the early hour. A car accident overnight had brought in multiple casualties, and the night shift staff looked exhausted. Sarah spotted a familiar face, one of the residents who'd been present during Hale's surgery. "Where do you need me?" she asked. The resident blinked at her in surprise. "You're back already?" "I'm back. Where do you need me?" Trauma Bay 3, multi-vehicle accident, possible internal injuries. Patient's been waiting for imaging." Sarah headed for Bay 3 without another word. The patient was a middle-aged man with obvious rib fractures and a distended abdomen that suggested internal bleeding. The attending physician, someone Sarah didn't recognize, was reviewing labs on a computer terminal. "I'm Sarah Brennan," she said. "I'm assigned to this patient." The doctor looked up, and Sarah saw the moment of recognition. Everyone knew who she was now. "Right, okay. Good." The doctor seemed flustered. "I was just about to order a CT scan, but the machine's backed up for another hour." Sarah examined the patient quickly. His blood pressure was dropping, pulse climbing, the classic signs of hemorrhagic shock. "He doesn't have an hour," she said quietly. "We need to get him to surgery now." The doctor hesitated. "The imaging would help us." "He's bleeding into his abdomen, probably from a ruptured spleen or liver laceration. Every minute we wait increases the risk of irreversible shock." Sarah met the doctor's eyes. "I know you don't know me, and I know there's been a lot of chaos around here lately, but I'm telling you as someone who's seen this exact presentation hundreds of times, this man needs a surgeon right now, not in an hour." The doctor looked at the patient, then back at Sarah. She could see him weighing his options: trust the controversial nurse who'd just been reinstated, or stick to the standard protocol and hope the patient lasted long enough for imaging. "Okay," he said finally, "I'll call for surgical consult." The consult came down 10 minutes later and confirmed Sarah's assessment. The patient was in surgery within 30 minutes and survived thanks to the early intervention. The attending physician found Sarah in the break room afterward. "Thank you," he said simply. "You were right. I should have seen it." "You would have," Sarah replied. "You just needed a few more minutes." "Maybe, but he didn't have a few more minutes." The doctor extended his hand. "I'm Aaron Keller. I transferred here from Seattle last month, so I missed all the drama. But I've heard the stories. Welcome back." Sarah shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks. It was a small thing, but it mattered." The rest of Monday passed in a blur of patience and cautious interactions with staff who didn't quite know how to act around her. Some were overtly friendly, clearly trying to distance themselves from what had happened. Others kept their distance, resentful or uncomfortable or both. By the end of her shift, Sarah was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. She checked on Hale before leaving. He was sitting up in bed reading reports on a tablet, looking significantly better than he had a week ago. "How was the first day back?" he asked. "Complicated." "Sounds about right." He set down the tablet. "I'm being transferred to Walter Reed tomorrow. Medical transport's coming at 0600. Sarah felt a strange pang at that news. Hale had become an anchor point during the chaos, someone who understood who she'd been before Riverside Memorial tried to erase it. "That's good," she said. "You'll get better care there." "I got pretty damn good care here," Hale countered. "Thanks to you." "You're welcome, sir." He studied her for a moment. "I'm putting you in for a commendation. A real one this time, not buried under classification. You saved my life twice now. People should know that." "General, you don't have to." "It's already done. The paperwork's filed." His expression softened slightly. "I owed you this 7 years ago. Better late than never." Sarah didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. The next morning, she arrived to find Hale's room empty and stripped, already cleaned for the next patient. He'd left without saying goodbye, but there was a handwritten note on the bedside table. "Brennan, don't let them make you smaller than you are. The world needs people who give a damn. Hale." Sarah folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. The weeks that followed established an uneasy new normal. Sarah worked her shifts, treating patients with the same focused competence she'd always had. Slowly, grudgingly, the staff began to accept her presence again. Not all of them. There were still nurses who wouldn't make eye contact, doctors who gave her assignments clearly designed to minimize interaction, but enough that the hospital felt less hostile. The independent review Vega had negotiated was underway, led by a firm that specialized in healthcare workplace investigations. Staff members were being interviewed one by one. Sarah had her own session, 3 hours of detailed questions about her treatment, the events leading to her termination, and the broader culture of the hospital. She'd answered honestly, though it felt strange describing her own experiences to strangers who took notes and nodded sympathetically. Dr. Lang had been arrested on multiple charges, including evidence tampering, drug theft, and medical negligence. His medical license was suspended pending the criminal trial. 2 other physicians who'd helped cover up the medication dosage error had resigned rather than face disciplinary proceedings. Patricia Voss had disappeared completely. Jessica mentioned hearing that she'd moved to another state. The reforms were real but slow. Mandatory training sessions on professional conduct, new protocols for reporting medication errors, a revised complaint process that bypassed the old HR structure. Sarah participated in it all with a strange sense of detachment, like she was watching someone else's vindication play out. But underneath the surface, something else was building. It started with small things. Patient charts going missing when Sarah needed them, lab results delayed just long enough to create problems. Equipment requests that somehow got lost in the system. Nothing dramatic, nothing she could point to as deliberate sabotage. But Sarah had survived too many hostile environments not to recognize passive resistance when she saw it. Then one Thursday afternoon in late November, 3 weeks after her return, Sarah walked into the staff break room and found a group of nurses clustered around a phone, watching something intently. The conversation stopped the moment she entered. "What's going on?" Sarah asked. Nobody answered at first. Then Jessica, looking uncomfortable, turned the phone around. It was a video, grainy security footage from the night of Hale's surgery. The angle was from inside the trauma bay, showing Sarah performing the emergency splenectomy. Someone had edited in dramatic music and text overlays calling her a hero nurse, and questioning why someone with her skills was working in a regular ER instead of trauma surgery. "Where did this come from?" Sarah asked quietly. "It's been making the rounds on social media," Jessica said. "Someone leaked it yesterday. It's gone viral, like hundreds of thousands of views." Sarah felt cold. "Who leaked it?" "Nobody knows. The video's anonymous." She watched herself on the screen, moving with practiced efficiency through a procedure she'd performed in far worse conditions. To anyone watching who didn't know the context, it probably looked heroic. But Sarah knew what it really was. Someone weaponizing her own competence against her, making her impossible to ignore, making her a target all over again. "Turn it off," she said. Jessica complied quickly. Sarah left the break room and headed for the bathroom, needing space to think. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at herself in the mirror. This was the cost of fighting back. This was what happened when you refused to disappear quietly. She dried her face and returned to work, because that's what you did. You kept moving forward even when someone was trying to drag you backward. That night, her phone buzzed with a call from Captain Willis. "Have you seen the video?" Willis asked without preamble. "I have. We're investigating the source. Someone accessed the hospital's security system illegally. But Brennan, you need to be prepared. This is going to bring attention you probably don't want." "I know. The Army's offering to intervene. We can have the video taken down, file complaints, make this go away." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What do you think I should do?" Willis hesitated. "Honestly, I think you should let it play out. The video makes you look competent and makes the hospital look incompetent. That might actually help your position there in the long run. Or it might paint an even bigger target on my back." "That too," Willis admitted. "Your call." Sarah hung up and sat in her dark apartment, thinking. The next morning, she arrived at work to find a crowd gathered outside the hospital entrance. Reporters, cameras. Someone had connected the viral video to the hospital scandal, and now everyone wanted the story. Sarah badged in through a side entrance, avoiding the chaos. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted again. Staff members stared at her with expressions ranging from awe to resentment to something that looked almost like fear. She'd become larger than life whether she wanted to or not, and people didn't know how to reconcile the quiet nurse they'd dismissed with the combat medic performing emergency surgery on viral video. She was heading for the ER when one of the hospital administrators intercepted her. "Ms. Brennan, we need you in the executive conference room. Immediately." Sarah's stomach sank. "What's this about?" "Just come with me, please." The conference room was full. Douglas Kern, Rebecca Torres, several board members, and two people Sarah didn't recognize, a man and woman in federal suits who had that particular bearing that screamed law enforcement. "Ms. Brennan," Kern said, his voice tight, "these are Special Agents Morrison and Reyes from the FBI. They have some questions about the circumstances surrounding General Hale's treatment here." The female agent, Reyes, stepped forward. "Ms. Brennan, we're investigating whether General Hale's injuries were the result of an accident or something more deliberate. We have reason to believe someone may have attempted to harm him, and that the attack may have been specifically timed to occur when he'd be transported to this facility." Sarah's mind raced. "You think someone tried to kill him and knew I worked here?" "We think," Agent Morrison said carefully, "that someone may have known about your history with the general and believed this hospital would be unprepared to save his life. But your presence here complicated that plan." The room suddenly felt too small. "We need your full cooperation in this investigation," Reyes continued, starting with a detailed account of everything that happened the night General Hale arrived. Sarah looked around the room at all the faces watching her. The woman they'd tried to throw away was now the key witness in an attempted murder investigation, targeting one of the most powerful military officials in the country. And somewhere out there, someone who'd tried to kill a general was just realizing their plan had failed because of a nurse they'd never counted on. Sarah sat down slowly in the chair Agent Reyes gestured toward, her mind already cataloging details she'd missed the night Hale arrived. The convoy timing, the specific injuries, the way his security team had behaved, not frantic like you'd expect from an accident, but controlled, methodical, like they'd been executing a contingency plan. "Walk me through it from the beginning," Morrison said, pulling out a recording device. "What time did you receive the initial contact?" Sarah recounted the phone call from Captain Rodriguez, the black SUV picking her up, the lockdown emergency bay. As she spoke, Morrison and Reyes exchanged glances that suggested she was confirming things they already suspected. "Did General Hale say anything about what happened to him?" Reyes asked. "Anything about the training exercise or how he was injured?" "He was barely conscious when he arrived. The only thing he said clearly was my name." Sarah paused, remembering. But later, after he stabilized, he mentioned it was a training accident. He didn't elaborate. "Because it wasn't an accident," Morrison said flatly. "General Hale was conducting a routine inspection at Joint Base Lewis McChord when the vehicle he was riding in suffered catastrophic brake failure on a mountain road. The vehicle went over an embankment. 3 people died. Hale survived because he was thrown clear on impact, but the injuries were severe enough that standard protocol would have been to airlift him to Madigan Army Medical Center. "So why bring him here?" Sarah asked, though she was starting to understand. "Because someone in his security detail received intelligence suggesting Madigan had been compromised. A credible threat that someone inside the hospital was waiting for Hale to arrive." Reyes leaned forward. The decision to divert to Riverside Memorial was made in flight with less than 10 minutes' notice. Only a handful of people knew where he'd actually end up. "And one of them knew I worked here," Sarah said quietly. "We believe so, yes." Douglas Kern cleared his throat from across the table. "I'm sorry, but are you suggesting someone deliberately tried to murder a general and somehow this nurse's employment here factors into the plan?" "We're suggesting," Morrison said with barely concealed irritation, "that whoever orchestrated the attack had done extensive research on General Hale's known associates and likely emergency protocols. Ms. Brennan's name appeared in classified after-action reports from Kandahar. Her combat record is sealed, but it exists. Someone knew Hale trusted her and believed she'd be able to save him if he ended up at this hospital, which meant the real target wasn't killing him in the crash," Sarah said, pieces falling into place. "It was making sure he died in the hospital afterward." Reyes nodded. "And given that you'd just been fired, the assumption was you wouldn't be here to save him. The hospital staff would follow standard trauma protocols, maybe make a few small errors given the pressure of treating such a high-profile patient, and those errors would be enough." "Jesus Christ," Kern muttered. "Except you came back," Morrison continued, looking at Sarah. "You were supposed to be gone, discredited, fired, probably facing criminal charges for drug theft, but somehow you were right there when he arrived." Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. "The phone call, Captain Rodriguez calling me directly. How did they even know to do that?" "They didn't," Reyes said. "Not initially. The decision to bring you in came from General Hale himself once he regained consciousness in the helicopter. He insisted they find you before landing. His security team had to scramble to locate you and get you to the hospital in time. So the plan failed because Hale was conscious enough to ask for me specifically, partially. It also failed because you're significantly better at trauma medicine than anyone expected." Morrison's expression was unreadable. "The surgical intervention you performed isn't standard nursing practice. Our medical consultants reviewed the procedure. They said it was expert-level trauma surgery performed under emergency conditions with minimal equipment. Most attending surgeons couldn't have pulled that off." Sarah felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The hospital administrators looked somewhere between impressed and deeply uncomfortable, like they were realizing exactly how badly they'd underestimated her. "I need names," Reyes said, pulling out a tablet. "Everyone who had access to your employment records, everyone who knew you'd been fired, everyone who might have known about your history with General Hale." The list was longer than Sarah wanted to admit. HR staff. The board members currently sitting in this room. Dr. Lang and Patricia Voss. Hospital security. IT personnel. "We'll need to interview all of them," Morrison said, "and we'll need full access to your personnel files, security footage, and internal communications from the past 2 months. Rebecca Torres spoke up nervously. "That's going to require a warrant, Betsa." "We have one," Reyes interrupted, sliding a document across the table. "Signed by a federal judge 2 hours ago. You can cooperate voluntarily or we can do this the difficult way, but either way, we're getting access." Kern's face had gone pale. "How long will this investigation take?" "As long as it needs to." Morrison stood. "Ms. Brennan, we'll need you to come to our field office for a more detailed interview this afternoon, if possible." Sarah nodded, her mind still racing through implications. Someone had tried to kill Hale and had factored her absence into their planning. Someone had researched her history thoroughly enough to know she was the one person who could save him, and that someone might still be watching. The meeting broke up with tense efficiency. The board members filed out looking shell-shocked. Torres was already on her phone with the hospital's legal team. Kern stopped Sarah on her way out. "This changes things," he said quietly. "If what these agents are saying is true, then someone used our hospital as part of an assassination attempt. The liability exposure alone—" "I don't care about your liability," Sarah interrupted. "People died in that crash. Hale almost died. This is bigger than hospital politics." Kern studied her for a moment. "You're right. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." He paused. "For what it's worth, I voted against your termination." I was outvoted. Sarah didn't know what to do with that information, so she just walked away. She found Jessica waiting nervously outside the conference room. Everyone's freaking out, Jessica said quietly. There are FBI agents all over the hospital pulling records and interviewing people. What's happening? I can't talk about it. Sarah, please. People are scared. Good, Sarah said more harshly than she intended. Maybe they should be. She regretted it immediately when she saw Jessica flinch, but she didn't take it back. She was too tired and too angry and too aware that somewhere in this hospital's recent past, someone had made decisions that contributed to an assassination attempt. The FBI interview took 4 hours. Sarah sat in a windowless room at the federal building downtown and went through every detail she could remember about the night Hale arrived, her termination, the events leading up to it. Morrison and Reyes asked questions with the kind of precision that suggested they already knew most of the answers and were just seeing if Sarah's story matched. Did Dr. Lang ever ask about your military service? Reyes wanted to know. Once, during my first week. I kept it vague. Did anyone else show unusual interest in your background? Sarah thought back. Patricia Voss asked a few questions, but she asked everyone about their backgrounds. She was nosy in general. What about patients? Anyone ask specifically for you or seem to know more about you than they should? That question made Sarah pause. There was a guy, maybe 3 weeks before I was fired, came into the ER with chest pain that turned out to be anxiety. He seemed really interested in whether I'd served overseas, asked specific questions about deployment locations. Morrison leaned forward. Describe him. White male, late 40s, fit, military haircut but wearing civilian clothes, gave his name as Michael Torres. Sarah closed her eyes, pulling up the memory. He had a tattoo on his left forearm, some kind of unit insignia, but it was partially covered by his sleeve. Did you report this interaction to anyone? No. It seemed like normal conversation at the time. A lot of vets recognize other vets. Reyes made notes. We'll pull the ER records for that date. If this Torres character was running reconnaissance, he might have made other visits we can track. They went through more details. Sarah's apartment security, her daily routines, whether she'd noticed anyone following her or anything unusual in the weeks before Hale's arrival. By the time they finished, it was dark outside. We're assigning you protective surveillance, Morrison said as he walked her to the building exit. Someone will be watching your apartment and following you to and from work. You won't see them, but they'll be there. You think I'm in danger? We think you're a witness in an active investigation involving people who've already demonstrated willingness to kill. That makes you a potential target. His expression softened slightly. You did good work saving General Hale. Don't let your guard down now. Sarah drove home through rain-slicked streets, checking her mirrors more often than usual. The parking lot of her apartment building looked the same as always, but now she found herself studying the parked cars, looking for anyone sitting behind tinted windows. She made it inside without incident and locked the door behind her, suddenly aware of how flimsy the chain lock seemed. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have stayed gone. Sarah stared at the message, her heart rate climbing. She screenshotted it immediately and forwarded it to the number Morrison had given her for emergencies. His response came back in less than a minute. Don't respond. We're tracing it. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. Sarah sat on her couch in the dark apartment, holding her phone and listening to every creak and settle of the building around her. This was different from combat. In a war zone, you knew who the enemy was and where the threats came from. Here, the danger was invisible, ambient, everywhere and nowhere. Her phone rang. Captain Willis. I heard about the FBI investigation, Willis said without preamble. Are you okay? Define okay. Fair point. Listen, I'm still in Portland coordinating with local military police. I can have someone outside your building in 20 minutes if you want the visible presence. Sarah considered it. The FBI already has surveillance on me. Federal agents are great at watching. MPs are great at making threats think twice about approaching. Willis paused. Your call, but I'd feel better knowing you had both. Okay, yes, thank you. They'll be there soon. And Brennan? Watch your back at the hospital, too. If someone used your termination as part of this plan, they had inside knowledge of the hospital's operations. That suggests someone on staff was either involved or feeding information. After Willis hung up, Sarah sat in the silence, trying to process that implication. Someone at Riverside Memorial, someone who knew her schedule, her employment status, maybe even her history with Hale. The list of people with that kind of access was uncomfortably long. She barely slept that night. Every sound in the hallway outside her apartment made her jolt awake. She kept her phone on the nightstand with Morrison's number pulled up and ready to dial. Morning came too slowly and too fast. Sarah arrived at the hospital to find the FBI presence had expanded overnight. Agents in suits moved through the administrative offices. Yellow police tape blocked off the records room. Staff members clustered in nervous groups, whispering. She found Aaron Keller in the ER looking harried. "They're interviewing everyone," he said. "Anyone who had contact with you before you were fired. It's chaos. Half the day shift called in sick because they don't want to deal with federal investigators. We're short-staffed?" "Critically, and we've got a full board." He handed her a patient chart. 62-year-old male, possible MI. He's in Bay 4. Sarah took the chart and got to work, grateful for something concrete to focus on. The patient, Mr. Warren, had classic cardiac symptoms. She ran an EKG, started him on aspirin and nitroglycerin, called for cardiology consult. She was reviewing his medication list when she noticed it. The handwriting on one of the prescription notes looked familiar. Too familiar. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled back through photos she'd taken of her own personnel file during the investigation. Found the image of the falsified medication order that had been used to frame her. The handwriting matched. Not Dr. Lang's handwriting, someone else's. She looked at the signature on Mr. Warren's prescription, Dr. Elise Kovac, cardiology. Sarah's hands went cold. Kovac was one of the physicians who'd been present during Hale's surgery. She'd stayed in the background, assisting but not leading. Sarah had barely noticed her. She pulled Mr. Warren's full medical record and started going through every note, every order, every signature. 3 months ago, Kovac had treated a patient named Michael Torres for chest pain and anxiety. The same Michael Torres who'd questioned Sarah about her military service. Sarah's mind raced. She needed to tell someone, but who? If Kovac was involved in something larger, approaching her directly would be dangerous. Going to hospital administration meant alerting people who might be compromised, the FBI. She needed to contact Morrison. Sarah stepped into the hallway and dialed the number he'd given her. It went straight to voicemail. "Agent Morrison, this is Sarah Brennan. I think I found something. There's a cardiologist here named Elise Kovac who treated the patient I mentioned yesterday, Michael Torres. Her handwriting matches the falsified medication orders that were used to frame me. I think she might be involved. Call me back." She hung up and turned to find Dr. Kovac standing 5 feet away, watching her with an expression Sarah couldn't read. "That was quite a message," Kovac said quietly. Sarah's pulse spiked. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." Kovac glanced around the empty hallway, then back to Sarah. "We need to talk, privately." "I don't think so." "Sarah, please. I know how this looks, but you're drawing the wrong conclusions." Kovac's voice was urgent, low. "I'm not who you think I am." "Then who are you?" Kovac pulled out a badge, not hospital ID, something else. Federal credentials for the Defense Intelligence Agency. "I'm an embedded operative," Kovac said quickly. "I've been working at this hospital for 8 months investigating suspected intelligence leaks related to military medical personnel. Your termination complicated my cover, but it also made you a person of interest in my investigation." Sarah stared at her. "If that's true, why didn't the FBI know about you?" "Different agencies, different operations. Morrison and Reyes are investigating the attempt on Hale. I'm investigating something bigger, a network that's been targeting military medical personnel and exploiting their knowledge for foreign intelligence purposes." Kovac stepped closer. "Sarah, the people who tried to kill Hale are part of the same network, and they're still inside this hospital." "I don't believe you." "Then check my credentials. Call the number on the badge. But do it somewhere secure, because if the wrong people see us talking, we're both compromised." Sarah looked at the badge. It appeared legitimate, but appearances meant nothing. "Why should I trust you?" "Because right now I'm the only person telling you the truth." Kovac's eyes were hard. Dr. Lang wasn't the mastermind behind your termination. He was a useful idiot who got manipulated into doing someone else's dirty work. The person who actually orchestrated everything is higher up the chain and still operating freely. "Who?" Before Kovac could answer, Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Morrison. "Where are you? Need to talk immediately." She looked up to find Kovac watching her carefully. "That's your FBI handler, isn't it?" Kovac said. "Don't tell them about me yet. Not until we know who's trustworthy in their operation. This network has penetrated multiple agencies." "You're asking me to keep secrets from federal investigators. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to figure out who's really pulling the strings." Kovac pulled a card from her pocket and pressed it into Sarah's hand. "That number routes to a secure line. Use it if you need me. And Sarah, be very careful who you trust. The person who orchestrated the attack on Hale knew exactly when you'd be vulnerable. That kind of intelligence doesn't come from casual research." She walked away before Sarah could respond, disappearing into the maze of hospital corridors. Sarah stood there, holding the card, her mind spinning. Too many agencies, too many investigations, too many people claiming to know the truth. She called Morrison back. "Where are you?" he demanded. "At the hospital. What's wrong?" "We need you to come in again. We've identified the person who sent that threatening text last night. You need to see this." The FBI field office was more crowded than yesterday. Additional agents moved between desks. Whiteboards covered with photos and connecting lines. The kind of visual investigation map that suggested this was bigger than a single assassination attempt. Morrison led Sarah into a conference room where Reyes was waiting with a laptop. "We traced the threatening text," Reyes said. "It came from a burner phone, but the location ping puts it inside Riverside Memorial at the time it was sent. And we found security footage of the person purchasing that phone 3 days ago." She turned the laptop around. The footage showed a woman at a convenience store paying cash for a prepaid phone. The angle was clear enough to make out her face. Patricia Voss. "She's supposed to have left the state," Sarah said. "She lied," Morrison replied. "We have her on camera at a motel 6 blocks from the hospital. She's been there since she resigned. Not leaving, not traveling, just watching." "Watching what?" "You." Reyes pulled up more footage, exterior cameras from various businesses near Sarah's apartment building and the hospital. Patricia appeared in multiple frames over the past 2 weeks, always at a distance, always watching. "We have a warrant for her arrest," Morrison said, "but we need to understand why she's fixated on you. What's her connection to the broader conspiracy?" Sarah thought about Kovac's warning. Different agencies, network penetration, trust, no one. "I don't know," she said carefully. Morrison studied her face. "You're holding something back." "I'm not." "Sarah, if there's something you're not telling us, now is the time. This investigation has already cost lives. Don't let misplaced loyalty or fear make it cost more." She wanted to tell them about Kovac, about the DIA badge and the warnings about infiltration. But something held her back, some survival instinct honed in combat zones where the wrong trust got people killed. "I need to use the bathroom," she said. In the women's restroom, Sarah locked herself in a stall and pulled out Kovac's card. The number was written in neat print. No name, no agency identifier. She dialed it. Kovac answered on the first ring. "I was wondering how long it would take you to call. The FBI says Patricia Voss has been stalking me. They have her on camera." "They're right. Voss is part of the network. She was recruited 6 months ago by someone using financial pressure, gambling debts, from what we've gathered. Her job was to identify military medical personnel at Riverside who might have valuable intelligence or connections. She identified me. She identified you, and when you became a problem, she helped facilitate your termination. But Voss is a foot soldier, not a decision maker. She takes orders from someone else." "Who?" Kovac was quiet for a moment. "How much do you trust the FBI agents running this investigation?" "I don't know anymore." "Good answer. Here's what I need you to do. Go back into that conference room and tell them you want protective custody. Make it convincing. Once you're in a safe house, I can make contact without compromising either of our operations." "Why can't you just coordinate with them directly?" "Because one of Morrison's team is on the network's payroll. I don't know which one yet, but I know the leak exists. If I surface now, I'll be neutralized before I can finish mapping the full operation." Sarah's head was pounding. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "You don't. But in about 30 seconds, Agent Morrison is going to receive a call informing him that Patricia Voss just walked into the Portland FBI field office and requested to speak with whoever's investigating General Hale's case. She's going to claim she has information about the conspiracy and wants a deal. How do you know that? Because I convinced her that turning herself in was her only option. Watch how Morrison handles it. If he brings her straight into interrogation without checking her for surveillance devices or sweep the room first, you'll know he's clean. If he hesitates or tries to delay the interrogation, you'll know he's compromised. The call ended. Sarah stared at her phone, trying to decide if she'd just been manipulated or warned. She flushed the toilet for appearances and washed her hands, studying her reflection in the mirror. She looked like hell. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, the scar on her forearm visible below her rolled-up sleeves. She walked back into the conference room to find Morrison on his phone, his expression tense. "You're certain?" he was saying. "No, don't move her. I'll be there in 5 minutes." He hung up and looked at Reyes. "Patricia Voss just walked into the main office. She wants to talk." Reyes stood immediately. "Could be a trap. Could be our break. Either way, we need to move." Morrison turned to Sarah. "We'll have to continue this later. There's an agent outside who'll drive you back to the hospital." Sarah watched them leave in a rush. No security check mentioned, no hesitation. Morrison was clean, which meant Kovac was telling the truth about at least some of it. The agent who drove Sarah back to Riverside Memorial was a young woman who didn't make small talk, which Sarah appreciated. She spent the drive staring out the window, trying to piece together a puzzle with too many missing pieces. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere had deteriorated further. More FBI presence, more staff refusing to come to work. The ER was running on minimal personnel, and patients were backing up in the waiting room. Sarah jumped back into the chaos because that's what you did. She triaged a motorcyclist with road rash, started IV fluids on a dehydrated elderly woman, calmed down a parent whose kid had swallowed a penny. Around 3 p.m., Dr. Aaron Keller found her. "I need your help with something," he said quietly. "It's probably nothing, but it's bothering me." "What is it?" "Come look at this." He led her to a computer terminal and pulled up a patient file. "Remember Mr. Warren from this morning, the cardiac patient you treated?" "Of course." His labs came back. Everything looked fine, so cardiology cleared him for discharge. But I was reviewing his chart and noticed something weird. Keller pointed at the medication reconciliation form. Someone added a prescription for him that wasn't in the original discharge orders. Beta blocker, standard cardiac medication. Except the dosage is way too high for someone his age with his kidney function. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Who added it? Keller checked the timestamp. Dr. Kovac signed off on it 20 minutes ago. Sarah's mind raced. Was this Kovac making a mistake? Or Kovac doing something deliberately? Has the patient been given the medication yet? No, he's still waiting for his prescriptions to be filled at the hospital pharmacy. But Sarah, if he takes this dosage, he could have a severe hypotensive episode or bradycardia, possibly fatal if he's alone when it happens. Sarah grabbed the phone. Call pharmacy and hold that prescription. Tell them there's a dosage error that needs physician review. Keller made the call while Sarah pulled up Kovac's location in the staff tracking system. The cardiologist was listed as being in the physician's lounge on the 4th floor. Sarah headed for the stairs, her pulse hammering. Was Kovac a DIA operative or something darker? Was this medication error a genuine mistake or an attempted murder? She reached the 4th floor and found the physician's lounge empty except for one person. Dr. Elise Kovac sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the rainy Portland skyline. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out," Kovac said without turning around. "Figure what out?" "That I'm not DIA, that I'm not one of the good guys." She finally turned to face Sarah, and her expression was almost sad. "The badge was real enough. I stole it from an actual operative 6 months ago, but everything else was a lie designed to keep you confused and off balance." Sarah's hand moved toward her phone. "Don't," Kovac said. "I'm not here to hurt you. If I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. I'm here to give you a choice." "What choice?" "Walk away. Take a leave of absence. Move to another state. Forget everything you learned here. In exchange, the network leaves you alone. You get to live a quiet life, and we get to continue our operations without interference." "And if I refuse?" Kovac smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then you die. Maybe today, maybe next week, but eventually. And your death will look like an accident or a suicide brought on by PTSD from your military service. Everyone will believe it because that narrative is already so easy to sell. Sarah kept her voice steady. Who do you work for? People who understand that the world runs on information and that military medical personnel have access to some of the most valuable intelligence imaginable. Deployment locations, injury patterns, experimental treatments, security protocols, all of it locked inside the heads of nurses and doctors who treated soldiers in classified operations. You're selling American military secrets? I'm facilitating the transfer of information to parties willing to pay for it. Call it whatever makes you feel morally superior. Kovac stood. But here's the reality, Sarah. You're a complication in a very expensive operation. General Hale surviving was bad enough. You becoming a media sensation and attracting federal attention made it worse. Now we need to either neutralize you or remove you from the board entirely. The FBI knows about you. The FBI knows about Patricia Voss, a low-level asset we're prepared to sacrifice. They don't know about me, and they don't know about the 12 other operatives we have embedded in military hospitals across the country. Kovac walked toward the door. You have 24 hours to decide. Take the deal and disappear, or refuse and accept the consequences. Choose wisely. She left the lounge, leaving Sarah standing there with her heart pounding and her hands shaking. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Morrison. Voicemail. She tried Reyes. Voicemail. She tried Captain Willis. Brennan, I was just about to call you, Willis said. We have a situation. The MPs I assigned to watch your apartment reported suspicious activity. Someone tried to break into your place about an hour ago. They scared him off, but we think it was a professional attempt. It was, Sarah said. Listen to me carefully. I need you to arrange immediate protective transport. I'm at Riverside Memorial, and I need to get somewhere secure right now. What happened? I'll explain when I'm safe. How fast can you get someone here? 10 minutes. Meet them at the emergency bay entrance. Sarah hung up and started moving. She took the back stairs, avoiding the main corridors. Her mind was racing through implications. Kovac was part of a larger network. Patricia Voss was a sacrifice play. The real operation was still running, and Sarah had just been given an ultimatum she couldn't accept. She reached the ground floor and headed for the emergency entrance, checking over her shoulder constantly. The bay was busy with an incoming ambulance, paramedics unloading a patient, nurses rushing to help. Sarah hung back near the wall, watching for the military transport Willis had promised. A black sedan pulled up. Military plates. 2 soldiers in the front seat. Sarah approached cautiously. The rear window rolled down. Captain Willis looked at her from the back seat. Get in. Sarah reached for the door handle. That's when she saw it. A detail wrong enough to make her freeze. Willis's uniform. The rank insignia was on the wrong side. Not Willis. Someone wearing her uniform. Sarah's hand dropped from the door, and she stepped back. The person in Willis's uniform smiled, and it was the coldest thing Sarah had ever seen. Wrong choice, the woman said. The sedan's doors opened, and 2 men climbed out, moving with practiced efficiency towards Sarah. She ran. Sarah sprinted toward the ambulance bay doors, her boots slapping against wet pavement. Behind her, the 2 men moved with the kind of coordinated precision that confirmed they weren't hospital security, combat training, professional operators. She burst through the automatic doors into the ER, nearly colliding with a nurse pushing a wheelchair. The waiting room was packed with patients and families. Too many witnesses for a clean extraction, which meant she had maybe 60 seconds before they adapted their approach. Sarah ran for the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. 4th floor, 5th. Her lungs burned, but she kept moving, her mind cycling through options. The hospital was compromised. The fake Willis proved the network had access to military resources. Kovac was still somewhere in the building. She hit the 6th floor and pushed through into the administrative wing. Fewer people here. Quieter. She needed a phone and a locked door. The executive conference room where she'd met with the FBI was empty. Sarah ducked inside and locked it, then grabbed the desk phone and dialed Morrison's number again. This time, he answered. Brennan, where the hell are you? We've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. Someone just tried to grab me at the hospital. Fake military transport with someone impersonating Captain Willis. I need immediate extraction, and I need it now. Morrison's voice went hard. Stay exactly where you are. Don't open the door for anyone except me personally. We're 5 minutes out. Sarah hung up and dragged a heavy filing cabinet in front of the door. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still. The windows overlooked the parking lot. She could see the black sedan still parked near the emergency entrance, the two men scanning the area. One of them spoke into a radio. They were coordinating with someone inside. Sarah's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You can't run far enough. Last chance. Take the deal." She deleted it without responding. 3 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah watched the parking lot, tracking movements. A Portland PD cruiser pulled in. Normal patrol or something else? 2 FBI vehicles appeared, moving fast. Morrison climbed out of the lead car with Reyes and 4 other agents. The black sedan pulled away quickly, disappearing around the corner before the FBI could intercept. Sarah moved the filing cabinet and unlocked the door just as Morrison reached it. "You okay?" he demanded. "No, but I'm alive." Sarah stepped into the hallway, scanning faces. The person who impersonated Willis, how did they get a uniform that accurate? "We're working on that. But right now I need you to tell me everything that just happened, starting with why someone tried to kidnap you." They moved to a secure room, an interior office with no windows that Morrison's team swept for devices before allowing her inside. Sarah recounted the conversation with Kovac, the medication error, the ultimatum. Morrison's expression grew darker with each detail. "Dr. Elise Kovac," he repeated. "You're certain that was the name?" "Positive. She showed me a DIA badge, said she was an embedded operative." Reyes pulled out her tablet and started typing rapidly. "There's no Elise Kovac listed in DIA personnel databases, federal or military." "Check hospital records," Morrison said. Reyes's fingers moved across the screen. Her face went pale. "Dr. Elise Kovac was hired 8 months ago. Credentials from Johns Hopkins, previous employment at 3 other military hospitals. But I'm cross-referencing her medical license number, and it's flagged. This license belongs to a different physician who died in a car accident 2 years ago in Baltimore." "She's using a dead doctor's identity," Sarah said, "and she's been working at this hospital for 8 months with access to patient records, medication systems, and personnel files." Morrison pulled out his phone. "I'm ordering a full lockdown of Riverside Memorial. Nobody leaves until we've accounted for every staff member." The next 2 hours descended into controlled chaos. FBI agents flooded the hospital. Every exit was sealed. Staff members were corralled into designated areas and their identifications checked against federal databases. Patients were moved to secure wings under armed guard. Sarah sat in the commandeered office, giving statement after statement to different investigators. She described Kovac in detail: height, build, distinguishing features, voice patterns, the exact wording of her threats. She mentioned 12 other operatives embedded in military hospitals across the country, Sarah said for the 3rd time. "This isn't just about Riverside." "We're coordinating with other field offices," Reyes assured her, "but our immediate priority is locating Kovac before she disappears." Except Kovac had already disappeared. The hospital-wide search came up empty. Security footage showed her leaving through a staff exit 30 minutes before Morrison had arrived, right after her conversation with Sarah in the physician's lounge. She'd changed clothes, removed her hospital ID, and walked out wearing civilian clothing that made her blend with the visitors leaving the building. "She knew we were coming," Morrison said, reviewing the footage with frustration. "She timed her exit perfectly." "Someone tipped her off," Sarah said. "Someone in your operation or in the hospital administration." Morrison's jaw tightened. "We're investigating all communication logs from the past 6 hours. But the real break came from an unexpected source. Patricia Voss, still in FBI custody, had been talking. Not because of any deal. The prosecutors had made clear there would be no leniency, but because she was terrified and desperate to shift blame elsewhere. Reyes brought the transcript of Voss's interview to show Sarah. "She confirms most of what you suspected," Reyes said. "Voss was recruited through her gambling debts. Someone approached her with an offer. Help identify military medical personnel at Riverside, and she'd get enough money to clear her debts and then some. She claims she didn't know it was connected to foreign intelligence until after she was already involved." "Do you believe her?" "Parts of it. She's definitely minimizing her own culpability. But she gave us names." Reyes pointed to a section of the transcript. "According to Voss, her primary handler was someone she knew only as Carson. They met in person twice, once when she was recruited, once when she reported your history with General Hale. Both meetings were in public places, but Voss managed to get a partial license plate from Carson's vehicle. And the plate traces to a car registered to a shell corporation that owns 3 properties in the Portland metro area. We're getting warrants now. Sarah studied the transcript. Something about it felt incomplete. Voss worked with Lang to frame me. Who coordinated that? Was it Kovac or this Carson person? Voss claims she never dealt with Kovac directly. All her instructions came through Carson. But when we showed her Kovac's photo from the hospital ID system, she recognized her as someone she'd seen meeting with Dr. Lang in the hospital parking garage about a month before your termination. The pieces were starting to fit together in an ugly pattern. Kovac had identified Sarah as a target. Carson had recruited Voss. Together, they'd manipulated Lang, who was arrogant enough and insecure enough to be useful, into orchestrating Sarah's downfall. "Where's Lang now?" Sarah asked. "County jail awaiting trial on the original charges. We're bringing him in for additional questioning based on Voss's testimony." Morrison appeared in the doorway. "We have movement on one of the properties. Thermal imaging shows at least 3 people inside. SWAT is staging now." They moved to a mobile command center the FBI had set up in the hospital parking lot, a converted RV filled with communications equipment and monitors showing feeds from multiple locations. Sarah watched as tactical teams surrounded a 2-story house in a residential neighborhood 15 miles from the hospital. "This is federal agents with a warrant," came the announcement over the speakers. "Exit the building with your hands visible." No response. The tactical commander's voice crackled over the radio. "Preparing for entry." Sarah watched the screen as agents moved into position. Flashbangs detonated. The front door splintered. Tactical teams poured inside with practiced efficiency. "Clear. Clear. We've got evidence here. Lots of it." The camera feed switched to interior shots. A makeshift operations center filled the house's main room. Computers, printers, stacks of files. One wall was covered with photographs and documents connected by colored string. Sarah recognized some of the faces. Military medical personnel from various hospitals, including several photos of herself. "Bag everything," the tactical commander ordered. "Get forensics in here." But there were no people. The house was empty. "They were tipped off," Morrison said grimly. "Someone warned them we were coming." Sarah felt sick. The network had penetration deeper than anyone had realized. The forensic sweep of the house took hours, but it yielded critical intelligence. Financial records showing payments to multiple assets, communications logs with coded references, a database containing personnel files for over 200 military medical staff members across the country, and a detailed dossier on General Marcus Hale, his medical history, known associates, security protocols, and a timeline of his movements over the past 6 months. "This attack was planned for over a year," Reyes said, reviewing the documents. "They identified Hale as a target, researched his connections, and created multiple contingencies based on where he might receive emergency treatment. And when they found out I worked at Riverside, it became their primary scenario," Sarah said. "Exactly. Your termination wasn't just about removing you as a threat. It was about ensuring Hale would die in a hospital that didn't have the one person who could save him." Morrison was on the phone coordinating with Washington. Sarah could hear fragments of the conversation, briefings, security clearances, authorization for expanded operations. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "This is now a joint task force operation with oversight from DHS and DOD. We're executing simultaneous raids on suspected network assets at 6 other locations across 4 states. What about Kovac? We've issued a federal warrant and distributed her photo to every law enforcement agency in the country. She can't stay hidden forever." But Sarah knew that people like Kovac had exit strategies, multiple identities, resources. She'd probably crossed into Canada or Mexico hours ago. The thought was interrupted by commotion outside the command center, raised voices, someone shouting. Morrison stepped out and returned moments later with 2 MPs escorting a woman in handcuffs, Captain Willis. The real one this time. "Someone want to explain why I just got pulled out of a debriefing at JBLM and dragged here by federal agents?" Willis demanded. Morrison gestured to Sarah. "Can you confirm this is actually Captain Willis?" Sarah studied her carefully. The uniform details were correct this time. The voice was right, and there was a small scar on Willis's left hand that Sarah remembered from their previous meetings. "It's her. Willis's expression shifted from anger to confusion as Morrison explained about the impersonation attempt. The color drained from her face. "Someone stole my uniform? How the hell did they even get access?" She stopped. "My apartment was broken into 3 weeks ago. I filed a report with local PD, but nothing seemed to be missing. They took the uniform and left everything else to avoid raising suspicion," Reyes said. Classic intelligence tradecraft. Willis looked at Sarah. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful with my gear." "Not your fault," Sarah said, though it almost had been fatal. Morrison's phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression changed. "We're coming now." He looked at Sarah and Willis. "Dr. Lang is ready to talk, and he says he knows where Kovac is." The interview room at the federal building was small and airless. Lang sat across from them looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. His expensive suit had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit. His usual arrogance was gone. "I want full immunity," Lang said before anyone could speak. "Everything I'm about to tell you, I want it in writing that I won't face additional charges." "You're in no position to negotiate," Morrison said flatly. "Then I guess we're done here." Lang started to stand. "Wait." Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the room. Lang's eyes fixed on her. "You tried to destroy my career because you were insecure, because I made you look bad in front of your colleagues. I get that. It was petty and cruel, but I understand the psychology." Lang said nothing. "But conspiring with foreign intelligence operatives, helping them target military personnel? That's not insecurity. That's treason. So before you walk out of this room thinking you have leverage, understand that there are federal prosecutors who would love nothing more than to make an example out of a physician who sold out his country for his ego." Lang's face went pale. He sat back down slowly. "What do you want to know?" "Where's Kovac?" Morrison demanded. "I don't know her current location, but I know where she was planning to go if things went wrong. She mentioned it once. A safe house in Astoria, near the coast. An address on Maritime Street." He rattled off the number. Reyes was already on her phone coordinating with the tactical team. "How long have you been working with her?" Sarah asked. Lang wouldn't meet her eyes. 6 months. "She approached me after I complained about you to another physician. Said she worked for a private intelligence firm that helped hospitals identify security risks among military transfer personnel. Made it sound legitimate, like I was protecting the hospital." "And you believed that?" "I wanted to believe it. She made it easy." His voice was bitter. "By the time I realized it was something else, I was already in too deep. She had recordings of our conversations, evidence of the medication tampering. She owned me." "Did you know about the attempt on General Hale?" "No, I swear I thought it was just about information gathering. When Hale showed up here and you saved him, I realized how badly I'd been played." Lang's hands were shaking. "I'm not a traitor. I was just stupid and arrogant, and she exploited that." Morrison leaned forward. "Who else at the hospital was involved?" "I don't know. Kovac kept everything compartmented. I never met anyone else from her network." He paused. "But she mentioned something once about having someone in hospital administration, someone who could modify records and access personnel files without raising flags." Sarah felt ice in her stomach. "Who?" She never said a name, but whoever it was had high-level system access. Morrison and Reyes exchanged glances. That narrowed the suspects to a very small group, hospital executives with master credentials to the entire electronic record system. Douglas Kern, Rebecca Torres, the CFO and COO. Maybe 6 people total. "We need to move on that Astoria address now," Morrison said, standing. "And we need to secure all hospital executives before they realize we're closing in." The tactical operation launched within the hour. Sarah watched from the mobile command center as teams converged on the Maritime Street address, a small house tucked behind a row of tourist shops near the waterfront. This time they found someone. Not Kovac, but Carson, real name Thomas Garrett, former Army intelligence officer dishonorably discharged 5 years ago for selling classified information. He was in the house's basement destroying hard drives when the tactical team breached. "Subject in custody," came the radio call. Multiple electronic devices recovered before complete destruction. Back at Riverside Memorial, hospital executives were being rounded up for questioning. Douglas Kern came willingly, confused but cooperative. The CFO and COO both arrived with lawyers. Rebecca Torres was found in her office, frantically deleting files from her computer. The IT forensics team recovered everything anyway. Torres has been accessing personnel files for months, Reyes reported, including yours, Sarah. She pulled your military records, your assignment history, everything, and she's been sending encrypted emails to addresses that match the ones we found in the house. Torres was arrested on the spot. Her lawyer's protests drowned out by the reading of federal charges. But there was still no sign of Kovac. Sarah sat in the command center as night fell, watching the operation unfold across multiple screens. Assets being arrested, evidence being cataloged, a conspiracy unraveling in real time. Morrison approached her with coffee. "You should go home, get some rest." "I don't think I can, not while she's still out there." "We'll find her." "Will you?" Sarah looked at him. "People like her have resources we can't even imagine. Exit strategies within exit strategies." Morrison's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, and his expression changed completely. "You're certain?" "Triple-check that identification." He hung up and looked at Sarah. "Border Patrol just stopped someone trying to cross into Canada at the Peace Arch crossing. Female, traveling on a French passport with a different name, but facial recognition flagged her as a match for Elise Kovac." Sarah's pulse jumped. "They have her? They're holding her for secondary inspection right now. We're coordinating with Canadian authorities to ensure there's no jurisdictional issues." Morrison's smile was sharp. "We've got her." But Sarah's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. It was too easy, too clean. "Show me the photo from the border crossing." Morrison pulled it up on his tablet. A woman in glasses and a headscarf, looking nothing like the Kovac Sarah remembered. But the facial recognition software insisted it was a 92% match. Sarah stared at the image, and that's when she saw it, a detail wrong enough to matter. "That's not her," Sarah said quietly. "The software says the software is matching bone structure and eye placement, but look at her hands." Sarah pointed. Kovac had a surgical scar on her right hand between the thumb and index finger. "I noticed it during Hale's surgery. This woman's hand is unmarked." Morrison grabbed his phone. "Do not release the subject at Peace Arch. Hold her for additional verification." But Sarah knew they were already too late. This was a decoy, a carefully planned distraction to pull resources north while Kovac escaped south, or simply disappeared into Portland's urban maze. "She's still here," Sarah said, "somewhere in the city, and she's planning something." Morrison started issuing orders, redirecting teams, expanding the search perimeter. Sarah's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello, Sarah." Kovac's voice was calm, almost friendly. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for. The decoy was expensive. I'm disappointed it didn't buy me more time." "Where are you?" "Close enough to watch you sitting in that command center looking very tired and very stressed." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Don't bother trying to trace this call. I'll be gone before your people triangulate the signal." "What do you want?" "To give you credit where it's due. You survived longer than I expected, fought harder, made this operation exponentially more difficult than it should have been." Kovac paused. "But here's the thing about survival, Sarah. It's exhausting, and eventually everyone makes a mistake." The call ended. Sarah looked at Morrison. "She's watching us right now. She has eyes on this location." The command center erupted into action. Agents poured outside, scanning rooftops and windows. Sarah stood at the RV's door, searching the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. Somewhere out there, Kovac was watching, planning, waiting for her moment. And Sarah realized with cold certainty that this wasn't over, not even close. The woman they'd tried to destroy had become the target of something far more dangerous than hospital politics. She'd become the one person who could expose an intelligence network that had spent years building its operations in the shadows. And they would never stop coming for her until she was either dead or silenced. Sarah spent that night in a federal safe house under armed guard, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building made her jolt awake. Every shadow beyond the window felt like a threat. Kovac's voice played on loop in her mind. Eventually, everyone makes a mistake. By dawn, she was exhausted and wired, running on coffee and nervous energy. Morrison arrived at 6 a.m. looking equally worn. "We've been analyzing the call," he said without preamble. Audio forensics picked up background noise, traffic patterns, a specific vehicle horn, ambient sounds. They're running it against recordings from various locations around the hospital. She was close when she called. Within a quarter mile, we're narrowing it down. Morrison hesitated. We also recovered data from the hard drives Thomas Garrett was trying to destroy. Once our techs pieced together the fragments, we found communication logs between him and someone using the handle Nightingale. We believe that's Kovac. What did the communication say? Morrison pulled out his tablet and showed her a reconstructed message thread. Sarah read through exchanges that made her stomach turn. Discussions about the Brennan problem, contingency plans if the asset survives, and a final message from 3 days ago. If containment fails, execute Protocol 7. What's Protocol 7? Sarah asked. We don't know yet, but based on context, it appears to be a final option if all other approaches fail. Morrison's expression was grim. Sarah, I need you to understand something. This network has resources we're still mapping. Kovac might be their field operative, but she's taking orders from someone higher up, someone with access to serious funding and intelligence capabilities. Meaning she won't stop until she's caught or I'm dead. Meaning we need to make sure the first option happens before the second one does. The forensic breakthrough came 2 hours later. Audio analysis pinpointed Kovac's call to a location within 3 blocks of the hospital, a commercial district with office buildings, restaurants, and a parking garage. Federal agents flooded the area, but found nothing useful. Until a traffic camera caught something interesting. Look at this, Reyes said, pulling up footage on her laptop. A woman in a delivery uniform entering the parking garage at approximately the same time Kovac made her call. Watch her movement pattern. The woman walked with purpose but checked her surroundings constantly. Not the casual awareness of someone being careful, but the trained vigilance of someone expecting threats. She climbed into a white van with commercial logos on the side and drove away. Can you get a better angle on her face? Sarah asked. Reyes enhanced the image. The resolution was poor, but the bone structure was familiar enough. That's her. Vehicles registered to a catering company that went out of business 6 months ago, Reyes said. But we've got the license plate. Every cop in Oregon is looking for that van. The van turned up 4 hours later, abandoned in a grocery store parking lot in Beaverton. Forensics found it wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing useful. But a security camera at the grocery store showed the driver, still in the delivery uniform, getting into a different vehicle, a nondescript gray sedan that disappeared into suburban traffic. She's changing vehicles every few hours, Morrison said, frustration evident in his voice. Classic evasion protocol. She could keep this up for weeks. But Sarah was studying the grocery store footage, a thought forming. What's near this location? What kind of neighborhood? Reyes pulled up a map. Residential area, some small businesses, a community college 2 miles north. Any hospitals? There's a clinic about a mile east. Why? Sarah's instincts were screaming. Kovac said something during her ultimatum. She mentioned that my death would look like PTSD-related suicide. That narrative requires specific staging, probably medication, a location that makes sense. She's planning something that looks natural. Morrison caught on immediately. So she needs access to medications and medical supplies, which she can't get from Riverside anymore because every system there is being monitored. But a small clinic? Sarah pointed at the map. Less security, easier to infiltrate. They hit the clinic with a full tactical team 30 minutes later, but again found nothing. The staff was questioned extensively. Had anyone noticed suspicious behavior, missing medications, unauthorized access? Then a pharmacy technician remembered something. A woman matching Kovac's description had come in 3 days ago claiming to be a visiting nurse practitioner, asking for a tour of their medication storage procedures. She'd seemed professional and knowledgeable. The technician had assumed she was legitimate. What medications did she have access to? Morrison demanded. The technician pulled up inventory logs. Looks like she focused on the secure cabinet. Sedatives, anxiolytics, cardiac medications. The exact combination you'd use to stage a suicide that wouldn't raise immediate suspicions. Sarah felt cold certainty settle over her. Kovac wasn't running. She was preparing for one final attempt. Morrison ordered protective detail increased around Sarah. 2 agents shadowed her constantly. The safe house was reinforced with additional security. But Sarah knew that determined killers always found a way if you gave them enough time. The break came from an unexpected source. General Hale called Sarah's phone directly, his voice stronger than it had been since the surgery. "I'm told someone's trying to kill you," he said without preamble. "That's the current situation, yes, sir." "Because you saved my life." "Because I became inconvenient to the wrong people." Sarah paused. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, which isn't far from the truth, but that's not why I called." Hale's tone shifted. "I've been digging into this network's operations through military intelligence channels. The people running this aren't just selling medical information. They're building a database of American military medical vulnerabilities, injury patterns, treatment protocols, medication sensitivities. Intelligence that could be weaponized against our forces in a conflict." Sarah's stomach dropped. "How extensive is the database?" "Over 5,000 military medical personnel have been profiled over the past 3 years. Your file was flagged as high priority because of your connection to me and your combat experience in classified operations." Hale paused. "Sarah, the person Kovac reports to, we've identified them. Director-level asset in a foreign intelligence service. This isn't some rogue operation. It's state-sponsored espionage." "Have you told the FBI?" "I'm briefing Morrison in 20 minutes, but I wanted you to know first. The people trying to silence you aren't going to stop because it's getting difficult. They're going to escalate because the exposure you represent threatens a multi-million-dollar intelligence program." After Hale hung up, Sarah sat in the safe house living room watching the news coverage of the expanding investigation. The viral video of her performing emergency surgery had been picked up by national media. Reporters were calling her a hero. Hospital workers were being interviewed about the conspiracy. The whole story was becoming too public to suppress, which meant Kovac's window was closing fast. Morrison arrived with the briefing materials Hale had provided. Sarah read through them while Morrison coordinated with other agencies. The scope was staggering. Operations at 23 military hospitals, hundreds of recruited assets, terabytes of stolen medical intelligence. "They've been at this for over a decade," Morrison said, "building slowly, carefully, and you stumbled into the middle of it by pure chance." "Not chance," Sarah corrected. "Hale survived Kandahar because I kept him alive. That created a connection they couldn't predict or control. When he ended up at Riverside, it triggered their contingency protocols. And now you're the loose end they need to eliminate." Sarah's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You win, Sarah. I'm done running. Let's finish this face-to-face. Come alone to the address below or people start dying. You have 2 hours." An address in northeast Portland, an industrial area near the rail yards. Morrison was already tracking the phone signal. "It's bouncing through multiple towers. Could be a spoof. Or she's actually there waiting." Sarah stood. "We need to move now." "Absolutely not. This is an obvious trap." "Of course it's a trap, but she's not bluffing about killing people. We've seen what this network is capable of." Sarah met his eyes. "Set up a perimeter. Go in tactical. But I need to be there when you take her down." Morrison looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded. "Full tactical support. You wear a vest and you stay behind the entry team. Non-negotiable." The address was a warehouse that had been vacant for months, its windows broken and graffiti covering the walls. FBI tactical teams surrounded the building while Morrison coordinated from a mobile command post 2 blocks away. Sarah wore body armor that felt heavy and awkward after years of not needing it. 2 agents flanked her as they approached the warehouse entrance behind the tactical team. "Movement inside," came the report from forward observers. "Single heat signature, center of the building." The tactical team breached the door with controlled precision. Sarah followed them into a cavernous space lit by dusty light filtering through broken skylights. Equipment and debris littered the floor, and in the center, standing calmly beside a support column, was Elise Kovac. "Took you long enough," Kovac said. Her voice echoed in the empty space. "I was starting to think you'd send robots instead of showing up personally." "It's over," Morrison called out. "You're surrounded. Put your hands up and get on the ground." Kovac smiled. "You think I called Sarah here to surrender?" She held up her phone. "I have a trigger app on this device. If my thumb leaves the screen or my heart rate stops, a signal gets sent to 3 separate locations across Portland. Each location contains enough explosive material to cause mass casualties." The tactical team froze. "You're bluffing," Morrison said. Test me." Kovac's expression was perfectly calm. "I've got nothing left to lose. My network is burned. My assets are arrested. My career is finished. But I can still take a lot of people with me if that's how this ends." Sarah stepped forward despite the agent trying to hold her back. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you to understand something." Kovac's eyes locked onto Sarah's. "You think you won because you're still alive, because the people who tried to destroy you are facing consequences. But you didn't win anything. You just survived. And survival isn't the same as victory." "You're wrong." Sarah's voice was steady. "I survived because I refused to disappear quietly, because I kept doing my job even when people told me I wasn't good enough, because when someone tried to kill a patient I could save, I saved him anyway." She took another step forward. "That's not just survival. That's refusing to let people like you decide what my life is worth." Kovac's smile faltered slightly. "Noble speech. Doesn't change the fact that I can kill dozens of people right now." "Then do it." Sarah called her bluff. "Send your signal. Prove that you're exactly what everyone already knows you are. Someone who kills innocent people because you can't accept that you lost." For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. The tension in the warehouse was suffocating. Then Kovac's phone buzzed. Her eyes flicked down to the screen and her expression changed completely. Morrison spoke into his radio. "What just happened?" The response came back immediately. "Cyber team just remotely accessed her phone and disabled the trigger app. She's got nothing." Kovac looked at the phone in disbelief, then back at Sarah, and for the first time she looked genuinely afraid. "No, that's impossible. I had triple encryption." The tactical team moved as one. Kovac tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. She was on the ground in handcuffs within seconds, screaming threats that nobody was listening to anymore. Sarah watched them drag her away, feeling something release in her chest that had been clenched tight for weeks. It was over. The arrest continued for days. Thomas Garrett flipped on his handlers in exchange for a reduced sentence. Rebecca Torres provided testimony about how the network had recruited her through blackmail. 3 more operatives were identified and detained across the country. Dr. Victor Lang was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for his role in the conspiracy. Patricia Voss got 6. Both would lose their medical licenses permanently. The foreign intelligence officer directing the network was identified but remained beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement, protected by diplomatic immunity in a country that refused extradition requests. Kovac herself was charged with espionage, attempted murder, conspiracy, and a dozen other federal crimes. Her trial was scheduled for the following year. Legal experts predicted she'd spend the rest of her life in prison. But the public reckoning at Riverside Memorial was almost as satisfying. The hospital's board of directors held a press conference admitting to systemic failures in oversight and workplace culture. Douglas Kern resigned. 3 other board members followed. The independent review commissioned by the FBI found evidence of pervasive discrimination against military veterans throughout the hospital system. Mandatory reforms were implemented immediately. A new complaint process, civilian oversight, regular audits by federal inspectors. And at the center of it all, Sarah Brennan became the symbol of everything the hospital had gotten wrong. The media attention was overwhelming at first. Interview requests, book deals, documentary producers. Sarah turned down everything except one appearance on a local news program where she made a simple statement. "I'm not a hero. I'm a nurse who did her job. The real story here isn't about me. It's about what happens when institutions prioritize ego over competence, when people get punished for being good at what they do, and when speaking up becomes grounds for retaliation. That needs to change, not just at Riverside, but everywhere." The interview went viral for different reasons than the surgical footage had. This time, people weren't just watching a dramatic rescue. They were hearing someone articulate frustrations they'd felt in their own workplaces. 6 weeks after Kovac's arrest, General Hale flew back to Portland for a special ceremony at Riverside Memorial. He'd recovered well from his injuries, though he moved a bit slower than before. The hospital's new interim leadership had organized an event honoring Sarah's service. The auditorium was packed with staff, patients, media, and local officials. Sarah sat on the stage feeling deeply uncomfortable in a dress she'd borrowed from Jessica, who'd become a genuine friend in the aftermath of everything. Hale spoke first, his voice carrying authority even weakened by recent trauma. "I've given out dozens of commendations in my career. Most of them were deserved. Some were political, but this is the first time I've presented a civilian award to someone who saved my life twice, once in combat, once in a hospital that tried to throw her away like garbage. He turned to Sarah. Nurse Brennan, or should I say Specialist Brennan, because that's the rank you held when we first met. You represent the best of what military medical personnel can become. Not because you followed orders, but because you had the judgment to know when standard protocols weren't enough, and the courage to do what was necessary anyway. He handed her a framed commendation signed by the Secretary of Defense. Sarah accepted it with shaking hands, unsure what to say. Hale saved her by continuing. But more importantly, you showed an entire hospital system what real competence looks like, what integrity looks like, what refusing to be silenced looks like. He looked out at the assembled crowd. The people who tried to destroy Sarah Brennan's career taught all of us a lesson, just not the one they intended. They taught us that hierarchies built on ego instead of merit eventually collapse under their own corruption, that talent can't be buried forever, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the only one capable of saving lives when it matters most. The applause was thunderous. When Sarah finally stood to speak, her voice was quiet but steady. I don't know what to say that hasn't already been said. This past year has been the hardest of my life. Harder than deployments, harder than combat, because in a war zone, at least you know who the enemy is. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But I learned something important. You can't destroy someone who refuses to accept your narrative about them. The people who tried to ruin me thought I was just a nurse, just a former soldier who couldn't cut it in a real hospital. They thought if they took away my job and my reputation, I'd disappear. Sarah looked directly at the camera filming the ceremony, knowing the footage would be shared widely. They were wrong, because competence doesn't disappear when someone tries to bury it. Truth doesn't disappear when someone tries to hide it. And people who've survived real hardship don't break just because someone powerful decides they're inconvenient. She held up the commendation. This is an honor. But the real victory isn't this award, or even seeing the people who frame me face consequences. The real victory is that I'm still here, still a nurse, still doing the work I trained for, still saving lives despite everyone who tried to convince me I wasn't good enough. The applause came again, but Sarah wasn't finished. To everyone watching this who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or targeted for being good at what they do, don't let them make you smaller. Don't let them convince you that their insecurity is your inadequacy. Keep doing the work. Keep being excellent. Keep refusing to disappear. She stepped back from the microphone and the room erupted. After the ceremony, Sarah found Aaron Keller waiting outside the auditorium. "That was a hell of a speech," he said.
"Thanks. I think I blacked out halfway through." He laughed. "Listen, I wanted to tell you that I'm putting together a new trauma training program here. Advanced emergency procedures, combat medicine integration, stuff that bridges the gap between military and civilian practice. I want you to lead it." Sarah blinked. "Lead it? Aaron, I'm not qualified to—"
"You performed a battlefield splenectomy in an ER bay with minimal equipment. You've treated more trauma in the field than most surgeons see in a career. You're the most qualified person I know." He handed her a folder. "Think about it. We're calling it the Brennan Protocol." Sarah opened the folder and found detailed curriculum plans for training programs that would teach civilian medical staff combat-proven techniques. Her techniques. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it. We need people who can teach this stuff properly, people who've actually done it under pressure." Sarah thought about it. Teaching. Sharing knowledge that could save lives. Training the next generation to be better than the one that tried to bury her. "I'll consider it," she said. 3 months later, Sarah stood in front of a classroom full of nurses and residents, teaching emergency trauma procedures she'd learned in war zones and perfected in the worst circumstances imaginable. The students hung on every word, taking notes frantically, asking questions that showed they understood the value of what she was sharing. This was different from the lonely vindication of being proven right. This was building something that would outlast the conspiracy, the investigation, the media attention. This was legacy. After class, Sarah walked through the hospital corridors that had once felt hostile. Staff members nodded respectfully as she passed. Some stopped to thank her. Others just gave her space, which she appreciated equally. She found Jessica in the break room, reviewing patient charts.
How's the teaching going? Jessica asked. Good. Weird, but good. I keep expecting someone to tell me I'm not qualified. You're literally the most qualified. Also, did you see the article in the medical journal? Someone wrote a whole paper analyzing your surgical technique from that video. They're calling it innovative. Sarah laughed. It's just what I learned in the field. Nothing innovative about it.
Maybe, but nobody else was doing it here. That's the point. Jessica closed her chart.
You changed this place, Sarah, like fundamentally changed it. People can't pull the same garbage they used to because everyone's watching now. Everyone knows what happened when they tried to bury you. Sarah thought about that.
The hospital had changed. New leadership, new protocols, new awareness that talent came in forms they hadn't bothered to recognize before. But the real change was subtler. It was in the way nurses spoke up during rounds, the way residents questioned attending physicians without fear of retaliation, the way military veterans entering the system were welcomed instead of treated with suspicion. Small shifts, but important ones. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, a new place, bigger and safer than the old one. She made dinner, reviewed teaching materials for the next day, and sat on her couch watching the sunset through windows that didn't make her nervous anymore. Her phone buzzed. Message from General Hale. Saw the medical journal article. Told you people would notice? Keep teaching. Keep fighting. The world needs people who refuse to quit. Sarah smiled and set the phone down. She thought about the past year, the termination, the conspiracy, the investigation. All of it felt distant now, like something that had happened to a different version of herself. But it hadn't. It had happened to her. And she'd survived it not by being perfect or invulnerable, but by being stubborn enough to keep showing up even when everything told her to quit. The nurse they'd tried to throw away had become the person teaching the next generation how to save lives under impossible circumstances. The woman they'd underestimated had become the standard against which others were measured. The target they'd tried to silence had become a voice that couldn't be ignored. Sarah finished her coffee and stood, looking at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw someone who'd been broken down and rebuilt stronger. Someone who'd learned that validation from powerful people mattered less than knowing your own worth. Someone who'd discovered that the hardest battles weren't fought with scalpels and sutures, but with the simple refusal to accept someone else's narrative about who you were allowed to be. She picked up her keys and headed for the door. Night shift started in an hour, and there were patients who needed her, because that's what she was, underneath everything else. A nurse. A damn good one. And nobody would ever take that away from her again.